When I was younger and hadn't quite been introduced to video games, I remember running around the small wooded area by my home, making up adventures and narratives as I went along, both alone and with friends. Even though there was nothing really here besides literally like one climbable tree, part of me just craved that adventure, where around every corner something brand new could be tucked away. And I know it sounds a bit silly, but if you're honest with yourself, this is something we all did in one way or another as kids. But as running around and pretending things exist isn't quite acceptable as an adult, many of us tend to now satisfy that innate desire for adventure and curiosity and uncovering things through video games. Take for example The Legend of Zelda, a game and series entirely built around the goal of letting players explore a world and meet people, fighting monsters and saving the day, and it's still one of the most popular franchises to date since its release in 1986. This sense of exploration is one of the reasons I play video games, as it's much cheaper and safer than, say, booking a flight to a random Icelandic countryside on a whim, as much as I would love that. Through all my years of gaming though, I think it's safe to say that I have never ever experienced a world quite like Elden Ring's The Lands Between. Elden Ring is one of the best games of all time, certainly, and is definitely From Software's best achievement, combining years of game experience into one incredibly impossible package. Combat and bosses are of course stellar, but it's Elden Ring's world that truly stands out to me personally. There's something about these lands that invite exploration unlike any I've experienced in a game before. The vast fields of gold, ancient halls long abandoned, and large, looming monuments all just begging to be explored. And from the moment I stepped into Limgrave in my first playthrough and rested at my first sight of Grace, I was in awe at this dark, comforting, and dangerous land I found myself in. There's an odd comfort I find in walking through an impossibly massive city, knowing that I'm the only living human there, or in trekking across fields of green torn asunder by battles waged long before I arrived. It's this comfort of being nearly alone in this world that is so ravaged, but still has so much beauty in it, that pulled me into Elden Ring, far more than the combat in its boss fights. For a world this impossibly large to have every inch feel so impossibly handcrafted and intentionally designed with care is a feat that 98% of video games don't even come close to achieving. From ancient ruins in the sky, to serene fields, to villages filled with creepy dancing ladies just minding their own business, The Lands Between is easily my favorite dark fantasy landscape in gaming, and being a FromSoft game, I don't think it's controversial to say that this is currently the best open world game to ever exist. Because what sets it apart from the hundreds and hundreds of other open world games is that, despite its size, nearly no part of the game was compromised in making a unique experience. Elden Ring actually delivers on the promise of a true open world game, one where you can go wherever with next to no guidelines, with true mysteries and things to discover around almost every single corner. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. So before we dive into what makes Elden Ring and its DLC stand out as possibly the best implementation of this open world design and exploration, we need to define what exactly an open world game is, and what makes it good, or not so good. So sit back, Tarnished, rest at a site of grace, and grab a cup of coffee as we take a walk through the lands between in search of understanding why it just doesn't get better than Elden Ring.
The fallen leaves tell a story. In our home, across the fog, the lands between.
The term open world game has become an all too common genre indicator for a wide variety of games that all try to boast these vast open worlds to explore, with mysteries around every corner. But if you've played more than one game in this genre, you'll know that not every open world title is created equal. While many of them do indeed have open worlds, the vast majority either end up feeling pretty empty or filled with just pointless repetitive content, or a mix of both, where you get something kind of like the most recent Assassin's Creed games, with worlds filled with just stuff for the sake of it, so that they technically aren't empty, but might as well be. And there's a lot of challenges in designing a true open world, and because of these, this is a scenario that has become really more common in recent years, and so we've ended up with a lot of these games feeling a mile wide and an inch deep, rather than a smaller world that feels miles deep with true depth of gameplay. Worlds like that are kind of like that one popular kid in high school. You know, pretty on the outside, outside, but shallow underneath, all that set dressing, right? Not to say that that is all bad, because sometimes you just want to walk around in a pretty world doing mundane things, and there's certainly a place for that in gaming. I mean, honestly, some of my favorite types of games are these smaller indies with gorgeous worlds and relaxed objectives where the main goal is to just experience the world that these people have created. Even Skyrim and GTA do this to an extent, where I think I probably spent 50 to 70 hours in Skyrim doing hardly any of the main quests and just exploring random caves or little dungeon areas that I've come across just because it's fun to walk around in this world. The physical rewards I'm getting aren't usually that interesting most of the time, but the feeling of finding a new location or like a new follower or just a new random quest line is even better. But the problem with other open world games come when the mundane, inch-deep content becomes required of the player instead of optional, like in Assassin's Creed Valhalla for instance. Because this can immediately make the player lose interest, as then you're not exploring a world, you were just checking off a to-do list. And also I just want to say, I don't hate Valhalla or anything, it's just a pretty good example of all these points I'm trying to make. I do love me some good Viking games. Open world exploration ultimately comes down to the intrinsic and extrinsic motivations a developer has to provide players. These usually come in the form of one or two engagement systems, either a purely reward-based one where you're encouraged to explore for the sake of a guaranteed reward, or one where the exploration is the reward, where simply suddenly coming across a new area is as dopamine-inducing as a shiny loot drop in Diablo. But the best games do a combination of these. Take Breath of the Wild's shrines, for example. Each one provides a set rewards in the form of a life increase, but 99% of them are optional to the player. Despite that, most players end up completing a lot of the shrines of their own accord anyways, either out of curiosity or, just because they need more health. The important thing to note is that these are not required. So if a player is intrinsically motivated to stop and explore a shrine they just stumble upon, they know that they will also have a reward at the end, which is just a bonus to that satiated curiosity. But imagine for a moment if this wasn't the case. Imagine if the shrines in Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom had a minimum limit you had to complete in order to progress to, say, the next Divine Beast or the next area of Hyrule, or you also had to collect a certain amount of Korok seeds to equip better gear. Even just saying that out loud kind of makes me a little sick to my stomach, because this would absolutely destroy any concept of fun in exploring these aspects of the games, because you wouldn't do them out of curiosity, you'd be doing them out of obligation, which would inevitably make the rest of the game a slog, and it would completely negate the wonder of exploring these games set out to accomplish. Another game that really blends these systems well, albeit in a different way, is Death Stranding. From the outside it looks like one of those games where all you do is the same thing over and over, and honestly it kind of is, but even though the gameplay can be mundane, the world is so treacherous that you generally have to be so aware of your surroundings and your cargo quality, etc., that each delivery, although while technically the same, does feel pretty different. So when you pick up a delivery in Death Stranding, your motivation is both satisfaction in completing a challenging delivery and gaining some reputation from doing so, although that's not typically the main goal for a first playthrough. And since the first time you deliver to someone new will be the most challenging and most rewarding, as you have to do a bit of searching to bring them what they want in order to bring them onto the network, it's a really good challenge you will feel rewarded in completing. While both of these examples, and many others I could name, deliver on the promise of an engaging open world in their own ways, and in all honesty are nearly perfect in the case of Breath of the Wild / Tears of the Kingdom, FromSoft games have forever been the king in encouraging player exploration in a small, handcrafted space. So it's not exactly a surprise that they managed to take years of crafting well-blended, reward-based exploration and curiosity-driven exploration and implement it across the entirety of Elden Ring's The Lands Between. In order to understand why the open world of Elden Ring is truly the best delivery of this massive, interesting, and surprising open world model, we have to understand the basics of a FromSoft game to begin with, and how its design is implemented here. Now, I'm by no means a Souls expert, as aside from Elden Ring and its DLC, I've only completed about half of Dark Souls 1 because I'm stuck in Blighttown, half of Dark Souls 3, I really only just got to Majula in Dark Souls 2, and I've attempted Sekiro about a dozen times at this point, and I think I just can't get good. I also own Bloodborne, but haven't played it. Sorry. If you want a great video outlining FromSoft's design choices, specifically Nikki Jakey's is incredible, but if you're watching this, odds are that you've probably seen that too. But if you did somehow stumble onto this video and aren't familiar with FromSoft's formula, this is the basics of it. You find a new area with a bonfire checkpoint, explore the new area complete with shortcuts back to the bonfire, doors you don't have the right to enter, and then usually finding a boss you aren't meant to be at or just didn't mean to find, and you do that for a few hours, getting utterly lost in a new area, dying a lot, and eventually beating that boss and getting to the next checkpoint in a new area full of even more twisting, interconnected pathways and locked doors and bosses, rinse and repeat. The level in which each game's world is interconnected varies, however, with Dark Souls 1 still having the best design in this aspect, only to really have some competition recently with Shadow of the Erdtree's map design being so interconnected and well laid out that it really hurts my brain, but a little more on that in a bit. Even though the interconnectivity aspect varies, everything else that makes FromSoft games up until Elden Ring feel so great to explore are present just to the max here in the lands between. And the primary system here is how the game invites exploration. Much like Tears of the Kingdom, there are very little indications on where to actually go on the map itself. In fact, when you start the game, this is what your map looks like, and when you finish, this is what it looks like. Aside from the Site of Grace arrows guiding you in a general direction, the only real marked locations on your map are for the map fragments, to just uncover more of the kind of fog of war mechanic of the map. And this is great because it's inviting the player to explore not by an overwhelming amount of map markers or big glowing indicators on a map, but instead by looming vistas in the distance or just weirdly shaped landmasses present on the map, leaving the player's curiosity to be the guiding force, which is about 16 times more intriguing than any other flashing map marker. And each new area of the map is really designed in this way, and where you first step foot into each of those areas, the main objective is probably going to be the most distant and visibly large location in your view. The best example of this is Limgrave. When you step into it, you immediately see Stormvale Castle, and even though there are two entire landmasses to your east and south when you exit the cave that you could go to right then, you will eventually end up at that castle, both because that's where the game wants you to go, and because it's the first thing you see, so why wouldn't you want to try and go there? In Liurnia, it's the Rea Lucaria Academy. In the Ossus Plateau, it's the enormous city of Leyendale. And in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, it's kind of the entire world. The simple act of placing intriguing locations immediately in your view from the start of a game allows you to realize that this world, this design, and this journey will be unlike any other game you've experienced when you first play. And when it comes down to it, this is the main thing Elden Ring does differently, but in combination with the excellent blend of reward and curiosity-based motivation to explore. Because of how invitingly haunting many of these spaces in the lands between seem, the player can't help but go out of their way to see if a cave is hidden behind that rock, or if something secret lies right off that ledge, because there's a message saying there is and a message saying there isn't, and one of those has to be right. So you explore, you die, you check around that corner for the chance something awaits you, not because a map tells you to, but because the world is designed in such a way that you want to. The Shadow of the Erdtree DLC in particular does all of this in an even better way than the base game. One of the main critiques of Elden Ring on release is that by going bigger, FromSoft had lost that interconnectivity of their world design that previous games had. And while I do agree that for the base game that's the case, as much of the hidden areas there feel vastly separated from the overworlds, they absolutely nailed this interconnectivity in the DLC. Because instead of having the world so spread out, they pulled a Dark Souls 1 and stacked it all on top of each other in winding, incredibly hard to find pathways. For example, when I first arrived in the Shadow Realm, I noticed this area way down below me from the first Site of Grace. I remember thinking, maybe there's like a massive elevator or something similar to the Savoria River Basin in the base game, or all of that is just, set dressing, because there's no way I can get all the way down there. Like, it's a long distance. And the same thing happened with this massive mountain in the distance. It just kind of looked disconnected from the main area, so I sort of wrote it off as a cool skybox asset. But of course, I was wrong for both of those instances, and after several hours of searching, I eventually just looked up a general guide on where to go to get to that first area I saw, only to find an entire river area running miles below in a canyon that is actually visible from the upper layer of the Shadow Realm. Needless to say, my mind was blown, and as much as I thought this happened to me in the base game, it happened even more over the course of my playthrough of the DLC. And one instance that has really stuck with me since playing, and honestly was a huge inspiration for this video, is finding this area, a tucked away field full of gorgeous blue flowers I just stumbled upon looking for a different location altogether. It made me stop in my tracks and hop off torrent just to appreciate what I was experiencing, as this was, in terms of bosses, an entirely optional area, also hiding an entirely other optional area, that you would not find just by following the golden path, but only through the curiosity of exploring. Many players probably didn't even see either of these entire areas unless they went out looking for it. And that is insane. And as I wrote this script, I couldn't even recall the name of that area, but I could recall what I felt upon discovering it, and that is a feeling rare for me in gaming nowadays. I felt truly, joyfully surprised. In a time when I've experienced a wide variety of video games, I've generally come to know what to expect from any given genre. For the most part, the majority of gameplay mechanics, art direction, etc. doesn't really surprise me all that much. Even if I really love something, it tends to be, oh, this is like that from this other game, or, ooh, this is a mechanic from this game but with a really unique twist. This is one of the reasons I think a game like Lies of P did so well, because it took what people liked about Souls games and put its unique spin on it with slightly different and altered mechanics. But Elden Ring is not one of those games. Elden Ring is the pinnacle of what the open world genre should be going forward, with exploration and a sense of wonder so at the heart of the design that much of the content isn't even seen by players. In the weeks leading up to the DLC's launch, Steam achievements showed that an average of 40% of players had beaten the boss required to start the new DLC, not just because of its difficulty, but because he was in an entirely optional underground region, making him an entirely optional boss that I wouldn't have even found my way into if it wasn't for the rune farm down there. And if that isn't the best example of what FromSoft achieved with Elden Ring, I don't know what is. I'm sure that someday a game will provide an even better open world exploration system than Elden Ring's, but until then, I think it's safe to say that outside of the lands between, you won't find a place better to get utterly and wonderfully lost in, because there's really just no other game quite like Elden Ring.
The very god. Curse you, Bale!
I have long observed the lands between.
Foul tarnished.
This world is in dire need of repair.
In search of the Elden Ring.
The mark of a true lord.
That tarnished, it seemed.